Braeszael strode slowly across the arena floor, her every footfall a thing of grace. The gathered Drukhari cheered the witch as she prepared to slowly and painfully dismember the monster that was set before her. The warboss was roaring and struggling against his chains. The chains were completely for show. If the filthy orc had only been held in place by mere metal rings, he would have snapped them in a blink of an eye. Modified stasis technology reinforcing the chains helped create the dramatic illusion. The moment Braeszael gave the signal, the field would be dropped, and the match would truly begin. The witch paced around the warboss, who was shouting every manner of obscenity at her in his extremely crude and primitive tongue. Braeszael swung her agonizer above her head dramatically as powerful energies hissed and crackled through the weapon. It might have been a bit extreme to use a weapon that could cut through the hull of a tank, but the unimaginable pain an agonizer could inflict helped mitigate the rather limited pain response orcs usually displayed. These people came for a show, but they also came to be fed. Braeszael would have to make the show a good one, showing off her quickness and skill against this lumbering brute. Braeszael finished her circuit around the warboss and gave the signal. The stasis generator cut out, and the brutish orc snapped the chains in suitably dramatic fashion. Braeszael laughed as the warboss predictably and mindlessly charged at her. She could have ended it right then and there. But the show must go on. The witch dodged and rolled deftly to the side out of the way of the charging brute who managed to grab nothing but air. The orc spun around, spittle flying from its mouth. The witch stood, placing her weapon hand on her hip and covering her mouth in a feigned yawn. This enraged the orc further, and he turned and charged again, swinging his massive fists, trying to crush the impossibly fast dark eldar. Braeszael placed her hands behind her back and dodged every swipe effortlessly, moving as little as possible to demonstrate her vastly superior speed and agility. The warboss raised both hands above his head and tried to smash Braeszael into the ground. It was such an awkward, slow attack that the witch felt like she could have simply walked out of the way. Instead, she danced to safety, with an artful pirouette as she twirled the agonizer around herself and bowed before the assembled crowd. Just as the witch was taking in the adulation of her peers in the stands, reveling in their cheers, she saw a green blur in her peripheral vision, moving impossibly fast. The orc's slow, clumsy movements suddenly vanished, as the massive warboss moved faster than any greenskin Braeszael had ever seen in her life. He spun around with massive, grasping hands, reaching for the Drukhari. Braeszael was in the middle of her bow as she suddenly had to try to leap forward out of the orc's reach. She felt her momentum stop abruptly as a large green fist closed around her foot, crushing the bones instantly. No, there was no way. This orc was a ponderous creature with no grace or speed.
Ha ha ha! Fooled ya! Ya dancing, prancing, pansy git!
Warboss Gitslaya quickly yanked on the witch's leg and pulled her over his head in a wide arc before smashing her head into the earth of the arena, as a loud crack reverberated through it, silencing the bloodthirsty patrons as an appalled silence fell over them. The massive orc unceremoniously tore Braeszael's head from her shoulders and held it high above his head to taunt the onlookers as he grinned wildly. The crowd began to boo as Gitslaya raised his arms in triumph. With one big wind-up, he hurled what was left of Braeszael's skull into the stands, though it smacked into the shields protecting the patrons, spattering brain, blood, and bits of skull all over it. As the bloody mess dripped down the crackling shield, Gitslaya held up his massive hand to his ear and reveled in the boos and taunted the crowd with many rude gestures. Gas began to flood into the arena as the orc enjoyed his victory. As the gas threatened to overwhelm Gitslaya's consciousness, the orc began to plan for his escape. And he wondered whatever came of his favorite attack squig, Poodle. Even the Dark Eldar couldn't imagine what the Warboss would do to them if he found out that Poodle had been harmed.